Alrighty, so I'm going to go over our last Develop It project, Develop It 1. And one thing I'd like to say before I get started, or we can just move over to the requirements, is that I know that this is definitely a bit of work. The thing I would say to you is that I don't ask students to do anything I haven't done myself. And I did attempt a new concept this semester. I've done different concepts, different semesters, and it really is important that you give this the amount of time and effort that it requires, remembering how important it is to your overall grade and the timing of everything. Okay, so for this, and this is not a surprise, but you have to create an API for your selected topic using whatever you did in Dev 0. And again, we're upgrading this to have a lot more real world functionality, creating CRUD operations using Mongo, Mongoose, and authentication. And now I covered this in week 8 Learn Together, but you need to create a dev 1 in your private repo. Again, I've done it in the public repo so that you can all see the work that I've done, making sure you run npm init to create that package.json. I would recommend you don't copy over another package.json. Sometimes it can just create a pain, right? And then use the directory structure that Andrew did, the source, models, DB, middleware. Oh, I have models in here twice. And then at that same level, you have the routers and then the index.js. And then you need to create 2 model files. And I think at this point, I'll actually just move over and show you this because it is just good to see this. So one model file would be user and one would be your specific data. Right, you need to include data validation and sanitization. So let me just move over to my editor real quick. So in the public repo, which you can see, you see the structure that I used. And in this case, if I want to drill down first to my models, I ended up, actually I got to drop this one because I ended up having 3 model files. And it's because of the way that I save the data. Because when a user sends an email, I want to save it in an inbox collection and a sent collection. So, and then this is the user model. So in this case, the user model doesn't really have to be any different than what we walked through and created with Andrew's course. This is where you create your specific data, your app specific data. And so in the inbox, I said you need to have 5 fields, right? So mine has sender, receiver, and these ideas of trimming and doing validation is where you get the sanitization and the validation of the data. And so in other words, this will look different for your particular data type. So I have sender, receiver, date, which I just use new date, subject, and again, making things required or defaulting their values. And then I had a body type, which was not required. So I did set up a default because I thought, well, you can send an email with just a subject line, although not a great idea. I did set up a status, and this is where I created an owner. And this is just going to populate based on who the owner is. And this is where I had to do a little bit of work, and I'll show you this in a minute, in order to, and then again, I had 2 models so that when a user sends an email, it populates the collection inbox with that owner that I had to find their ID, and it populates the send, which populates the receiver versus sender idea. But I'll show you that in a minute. Okay. So these models are very simple. The only difference between inbox and send is that I dropped the status in here, but I kept, of course, the owner. But again, these would be different owners. Okay. All right. So that's the models. Those are the fields that I'm talking about. And then just moving back over here, right? This is the 5 fields you need to do. Separate your router files. So this is here where I'm going to roll this up real quick and just drop these for a minute. I don't think, we'll see if I need to come back to them. But then in my router, which is under here. So remember, that's all the things in your source folder. your DB, which is just your connection file for Mongoose, your middleware, which is your auth file, and then your model files, and then your index. And then up in your router, for me, I had two routers. Of course, one for user, which again can look very identical if you want to what Andrew did, but this is my specific route, right? So here are my required imports. I did have to bring in both the sender and the inbox and the send, the user, and of course authentication. And so here's my inbox, my post in the route for inbox, and I can show you in a minute the Postman side of this, but this should not be a big surprise. Here's auth, which we learned how to do through section 12, async functions, which we learned about async and await. And so I had to, before I could actually set up the data, I had to get the ID of the receiver, okay, because I needed to find one, and this was based on what's coming in. Now, here's what I will go ahead and flip over and show you because it's related. In Postman, and this is the idea of, these are all users. So this is when I send an email in the body, I put, and I actually, as I did more of this, I thought, you know what, I could drop the sender, but I thought for simplicity's sake, just for demonstration's sake, I won't, because I could have defaulted this based on the login. But again, so it's iteration. You do something, you realize you can do it better. So sender and receiver, subject and body. Okay. So in this case, this is what I'm talking about, where I grab request or body receiver to find the underscore R object, the object. And actually I could have, yeah, the object. And then I pulled off the ID when I set up the inbox, which is the new based on the model, right? And then I just put the spread operator to get everything that was on the body. And then I determined the owner based on the fact that I had to get the ID for the receiver. And this again is where you can see that I basically did the same data, but I showed you just a minute ago a little difference between that, between the inbox and the sent. Because again, think about your own inbox or your own Gmail or whatever you're using, is that you can delete something in your sent folder, you know, and in your inbox. So they are separate entities, separate entries. So in this case, it was pretty easy just to grab request user dot underscore ID. And this is because you're using that auth. And so understanding how auth works, authentication, it's returning that user object so you can pull things off of it, which is one of course the many benefits to authorization. And then I just did a try catch block. I saved these, and then I ended up just sending back what was in for show how a new message was sent. Okay, or just the output was the inbox, what came back from inbox. I could have sent both, but I ended up, and I'll show you this in a minute, is in the get for inbox, is I returned both inbox and sent. But let me just show you that in Postman real quick. Here we go. So when you send an email, right? So I'm going to go ahead. Now, by the way, I can also look at this, like who's logged in. So logged in, get user who's logged in. So I want to make sure of who I'm logged in as. So in this case, taking a second, I'm logged in as Jack. So then when I send email, I want to have the sender be Jack. And the receiver would be Jane. And I'll just keep this content I'd been playing with, and then I'll send that off, right? And so now I have a new entry. My status is set default to N. I get that ID, and it just sends back that. But then when I want to look at the inbox, and I'll show you this in the code, I specify, again, I could have done this, I realized after I could have done this without specifying this, because I can just grab this off the authentication. But I thought for demonstration purposes, I'll leave this in here. So then when you ask for the inbox, you get the inbox emails and you get the sent emails, okay? So going back to that code, So this is the read. So this is the R part of CRUD for my specific data. So I grab the email off of the body request that's coming in off of Postman, right? So make sure you got this coming in off of here. Validate that it's valid. And then I get the inbox emails by doing a find. And I do this based on the receiver and the owner, right? So this is where Andrew got pretty in the weeds talking about how you could populate this, but I just went the easy route, which I would recommend unless you just want to go a little higher, which is good too, but just querying it based on the owner. And then I did the same in the set. So I got based on sender is the current email. So this is where I'm looking at both of those collections and then returning that. And then if I get nothing on has to get nothing on both of them, then I say there was no email. Otherwise, I return that. Okay. So that's my read. And then this is when I get a specific, and this is no different than really what we did before, but you have to be authorized. I grab the ID of what, and this is where a specific email, right? So if I want to read a specific email, and if there's nothing there, I say can't find it with that. Otherwise, I send back the email I got from find one, again by the ID and only looking at, and I could have probably dropped the owner here because the ID is going to be specific, but I kept it in there. And here's my patch route. So my patch route is my update. So what I ended up doing here was I did, and I'm not have to play with this. I think there's a little bit of a deprecation going on update many, but it worked, which was allowed me to query based on my owner anything with the status of new. And again, this is a patch and I'm only making one update. So I didn't do that code that he did showing the different updates because I could only do a status update. And then I set it to status of R, and then I set back, actually just console logging it here. So that's my U part of my update, and then my delete. And I ended up doing a delete, of course, for my inbox and my sent box based on the ID. Okay. So again, I look for the ID based on what was coming in from the parms, the request parameters. And then I did it based on, it had to match these things. And I did the same thing for find and delete on the set. Okay. All right. So just to kind of go over, so that's my routes. Again, I'm not going to go over the user part because that's no different than what we did. And you can make modifications there if you want. But here's my index file, really short and sweet here because everything is segregated into its own directory from a user and a inbox. And don't think, and I don't know if you caught this, but even though I set it up as inbox router, I actually did include a route that did not include inbox. So it's not as if you're restricted to that. You're just giving this a variable name to bring in those external files. Okay. So I'm trying to think of what else here. Of course, the auth, right? So for your code review, at least be able to, be able to describe your understanding of what auth is doing, right? Understanding what it's doing with your creating tokens, verifying those tokens, storing those tokens, how it's handling authentication, right? So at least have the ability to be able to talk about that. Okay, so I went over the index, I went over the model files, I went over that. I think I'm good. Let me come back over here then and see, right? Implement authorization. This is where hopefully you've benefited from doing some of the pre-work that I recommended in week 8 to set up so that when you do, and I'll actually have a attendance about this, but you hopefully will walk through the last section 12 here using your own setup, right? So walking through all these steps in your development 1, which should make it a little easier. I know for me, that's the way I did it, and it definitely made it easier. Okay. Determine how you're going to secure your user data, right? So this is where I showed you how I did it in mine, because I needed both the sender and the receiver to have a copy of it, I broke it down into 2 collections. I did use that owner inside, or added the owner property inside of the model to allow me to populate that during my endpoint processing so that I could populate that, so then pull that out later. Okay. So of course, this is one of the things I've been talking about, and I talked about in week 8, but is using the Postman features. Oh, actually, it's down here, but this is just talking about using these Postman features, and I'll just review this. So you need to make your life easier so that you don't have to, once you're testing authorization, on the create user and the login, is use this idea of this little bit of code he wrote to pull off the auth token so that it populates for you based on this code. And remember, when you're doing a login, you're looking for a 201, and when you're 200, and when you're doing the create user, it's a 201. Make sure you do that. That way your auth is being populated, your authorized token, your JWT is being taken off, so you don't have to do that each time, because it's just a pain to go in there and do that, right? Okay, so let me come back here. Now this is where really the user-specific method statics and pre's are really nothing different than what we saw in section 11. And just to be clear about this, is in the model for your user is really where we did these things, where we set up, of course, here's our data. And then we set up, and by the way, these virtuals I didn't need, and I will probably strip out, because it's really just when you're populating owner specific data, but you can use the way he showed it, which was user populate and then execute. I just did a query against the owner, matching it with what was logged in or what I needed. But this is redoing or creating a method, overriding the toJSON method, not to return those passwords and tokens. Doing the method to generate tokens, and these are methods that you're calling inside of your routes. And then these are the statics, so that when you do the find by ID, you can actually do a match. You compare the crypt. Remember that in this case, B encrypt only works one way, but you can do a compare, right? And to see if they match, and if not, you just throw the error. And this is where on the save, so this was before the save, and this was where you're encrypting the password, right? So this is what I'm talking about. And really in here, there's nothing different, unless you wanted or needed to write something different for that part. And just to end with the concept that this code review is, as far as the process, is identical to last time. I do suggest, if possible, you come in person and bring your laptop, but if not, and I covered this in week 8, is the idea that to make this review easier, what you want to do is, in this case, invite me into your workspace, right? By adding, right, this email in there, because that way because what I will do, and by the way, there we go, or you can send me the link, I guess, invite into the team. But in this case, one of the first steps I will do is I will pull in your code. I will actually do this for week 8 as well. So I'll already have it set up, and then I'll just, pull in new code that you have. I will then hopefully have your setup in Postman, and it should make our review much easier. And then today I did post the sessions that are available. I have a couple of sessions on Wednesday. Most of them are on Thursday, right? From 4:30 all the way up to 7:30. Okay. So I hope this helps you at least go over what you need to do for this work and how I accomplish mine. If you have any questions, please let me know. Talk to you soon.